Sphinx with the aluminum angle thrust structure at that end. 2Cat3 is getting even closer, kind of. It's about the same size, but the valve architecture is totally different and way too complicated. Doesn't really have a real QD, it just kind of rips the tube off. And then 3Cat8 was kind of a random, unrelated rocket in there where we had a super long tube. We said, let's make a tank out of this, put a regen chamber on it, and flew it to about 10,000 feet. And took some things from that to Mojave Sphinx. I think that was the first time, one of the first times we used the flanger QD, as well as 1Cat4.
This is just like kind of an overview of how we develop rockets. We've been doing this for about 4 years now. We've gone through 5 distinct generations of liquid rocket. I won't read to you what all goes into them, but essentially the valves have been the main thing we've changed until we finally got to what we think is like the global optimum for our liquid rocket architecture, which is those servo valves on Mojave Sphinx.
Yeah, so the main driving force behind this design is simplification of design in all aspects. So yeah, ball valves, very simple, easy to put together. Aside from plastic 3D printed parts, they're pretty much all off-the-shelf components. The stack piston tank is really easy to load fuel in. There's just a hole in the side for the static vent orifice on the nitrous tank. There's fewer parts than a concentric tank, like the old Ratworks tribirds use. And then heat sink chamber doesn't have any consumables. There's no liner to swap. There's no messy, goopy RTB that you have to apply every time. So you can launch or test more times in a day. There's less work to recycle. And with the injector that we use, there's no angled holes. There's no super tight tolerances. There's no complex geometry. Everything is manually machinable on a very basic lathe.
We had 3 different versions of Mojave Sphinx before we got to the one that we released. Original V1.0 was just this, it looks very different, kind of most of the same architecture, but packaged a little bit differently. It's not really important what it actually looks like, except that you can see the chambers hanging out the back. We changed that.
Yeah, so we went to version 1.1, where we ended up implementing the longer thrust structure that attaches at 2 points to the chamber and the tank. That's really good for alignment and rigidity. It also makes it a lot easier to work in the aft end, so if you're replacing the igniter, it's quick and easy to do instead of a painful process that takes you half a day. Went to a cardboard and 3D printed airframe instead of fiberglass. It's way cheaper. If something happens to it, you're not out a couple $100 worth of parts. This version still had very low injector performance, and we were using nylon tubing with push-to-connect fittings, which works fine operationally, but it's annoying to connect and disconnect, which you have to do to take the forward bulkhead off to refuel.
And finally, V1.2 was the modern version that we're on. This used the Scrintle injector, has AN flared flex hoses for the fuel and oxidizer. It's basically V1.1, but everything is betterized because we had so much experience flying this rocket that we knew what to upgrade, and that's how we arrived at the modern version of it that you see there.
Yeah, really the biggest downside at this point in the design is that the lower airframe tube sometimes gets damaged when the rocket touches down and it tips over after the parachute comes down, but it's a $4 cardboard tube. If you only get a couple of flights out of it, it's still a pretty good deal.
There's some cool comparison photos of V1.0 versus V1.2.
So a lot of what went into this was a lot of testing. This is most but not all of our static test data plus just kind of thrown on there. Point being that we did a lot of tests. We did a lot more tests than we probably needed to, because part of what we were going isn't just, we weren't just trying to say, does it work, or how does it work? We're trying to say, does it work a dozen times in a row? How repeatable is it? A couple of tests you can see on there, we said, can we throttle it? Turns out you can. So we had a lot of objectives that we were accomplishing through testing to make this something we were confident in putting out and encouraging people to replicate.
We also ran into a number of issues on this that we solved. Gasket failures, we had burn-throughs in our chamber, more gasket failures. As you can see, gasket failures were kind of a problem, which is why we say in the guidebook that you should check the torque on your thrust chamber fasteners, because that tends to happen if you don't.
Yep.
We also had the igniter on a couple occasions go for a little flight on otherwise static tests. So check the torque on your fittings.
Yeah, that's also what happens if you damage your NPT thread and then you retap it, and then you do that 3 more times, and you go, oh, it's a little bit loose in there, but it'll probably be okay. Sometimes it comes out. So try not to do that.
Yeah, we also have had, this thing hard starts like a fair bit. It doesn't really affect it because the chamber's kind of a tank. We also intentionally hard started one time just to see what would happen. That's a fireball of alcohol you can see on the pad there.
Yep. Turns out it's fine as long as everything is torqued correctly.
And this is just a fantastic photo that we have.
Yeah, it's wild, yeah.
This is the first and only liquid rocket drag race between serial number 1 and 4.
Yeah, really, the only reason to do this was because we could and it's cool, but it's a really good showcase that the system is reliable and repeatable enough that our ignition on these 2 rockets was within about 40 milliseconds from each other. It seems they're around like maybe 3 feet apart. If you go and count the frames, yeah, it's about like 40 milliseconds between one ignites and when the other ignites.
Okay, so the documentation was a large part of Mojave Sphinx. I think everybody's kind of seen the book at this point.
So yeah, so we get this question a lot. Why did you do this? Like, you know, the book was a tremendous amount of effort. People say like, what possibly drove you to put all of this time and effort into making this thing?
And then give it away for free.
Yeah. So so the answer that I'm trying to answer, the answer that I'm trying to articulate here is like, imagine that it's 2019. It's like 6 years ago now. You want to build some kind of rocket. What's out there to help you do that? For solid rockets, a bunch of stuff, plenty of resources, lots of things to base your design off of. If you want to build a hybrid, there's some stuff. You can kind of copy Ratworks and copy Contrail. You can buy a Contrail motor, see how it works. There's a couple of software pieces out there that'll tell you kind of what your performance is going to be. If you want to build a liquid, good luck. In this 2019 scenario, you're going to go online. You're going to say, how do I build a liquid rocket? People are going to say, here's this book. It was written in the 1960s. Figure it out.
And it's also for orbital class rockets. So just, I don't know, to get good.
Yeah, so not really a whole lot of resources existed for hobby scale amateur liquid rockets when we started this.
We tried over the years a couple times to make something that we thought was like, oh, maybe we can put this out there, people will copy it. We had what we called 1Cat or 1Cat 2, and then KitKat. The CADs for those existed on our drive, and some people copied them and made some derivatives that were kind of cool. But they were never really satisfactory. They didn't help us actually do anything. And a lot of times with projects, people say, I'm going to document this. And it turns out that just finishing a project is a lot of work. And then writing it down is also a lot of work. Writing it down in detail that other people can actually understand is a whole other ball game. And then making it so good that you can put it out there and not be asked a billion questions every day is a whole other ball game on top of that.
Yeah, so having been through that experience was we realized how easy it is to fall off of that chain before you get to publishing this documentation, and had that in mind the whole time throughout this process. Is it is so easy to not get to the finish line that we set for ourselves.
We were like, oh, we're just going to get build materials and build instructions for this. It'll be this 40-page pamphlet. It'll be fine. It's great.
It's a PowerPoint, make it a PDF, we're done.
Well, then we're like, well, we kind of have to explain what the design's all about. And we need to make the same thing for the GSE so you can actually launch it. So that expanded to 4 sections. And then we were like, well, we first have to talk about what this architecture is, and then show we have to prove that it actually does work. Here's how well it worked. And then we were like, well, we also put safety and launch procedures. We got to put in all of our drawings and CAD and references, and then you end up at this gigantic 370-page document.
Yeah, you might notice that there's a lot more on this slide than when we thought we were going to be doing when we started this.
Yeah, documentation's hard. You can't read this, but this is our list of action items for this document over the course of about a year that we wrote down and then had to check off. Just so many images and files. We had 6 proofreading and editing documents for it.
We rolled those over when they got to about 30 pages.
So the end result of all that is that we now have a new standard for documentation, which is very high quality, very accessible to anybody out there. This was required because we do stuff that's like people all over the country and all over the world are kind of looking at. So we're trying to be like the example for everybody of like, this is the standard we should all be striving for. It is a real book. I got ISBN numbers for it. And I actually gave a lecture on this in a graduate course, so it's been used in an academic setting.
So we're going to talk a little bit about taking this rocket, actually two of them, to the Balls 32, which is the big Tripoli event at Black Rock. So we went last year and did some demonstrations of this, which is notable because historically Tripoli does not allow liquid motors, but we're making some progress there.
Yeah, so like Tripoli liquid rockets, if you know anything about Tripoli, that is like, that will never happen. But it did. How it happened? Well, first we had to make a proposal to Tripoli. We made this whole document. The quality was instrumental to the acceptance of it. Phase 2 was we then had to give a presentation on it at the Balls event, do a cold flow, do a hot fire, and then finally we could get to launching it. And then we launched it, and again, and again, and again, because we're just that good, I guess. But Tripoli really loved it, which is a cool thing.
Yeah, and this was a great opportunity to have a lot of people who had not seen amateur liquid rockets in person before. You not only get to see it, but get to see it static fire and fly multiple times, and see like how quickly we get turned around. Get a sense of what the operations look like. People have a lot of preconceived ideas, but just like seeing the process happen in person really kind of brings it down to like it's very easy to understand that it's not any more complicated than it needs to be.
These are just some photos from the events. We did our cold flow with water, so it's outside of the playa. How we fuel the rocket is we just pull up 4 bulkhead and we pour fuel in. We have serial number 1 and 2 there. We did end up launching both of those at the event. This is what our static fire test setup looked like. When we went to launch configuration, we would just swap out that crossbar at the top for an extra bit of launch rail and launch off of it. And then recovery on the fly was very easy because just open, just a little dry lake bed.
And that photo on the lower left shows like our entire ground support equipment. So we've got the nitrous bottle, which is upside down because it doesn't have a dip tube. And then that little white box that's hanging off the bottle cart is the entire GSE system. So that's our receiver, our battery voltage regulator, the fill valve that fills nitrous into the rocket. Everything is in that little box that's about 8 by 10 inches.
And that's our small GSC. We do have a bigger one that you may have seen. It's a red toolbox. It's a bit more robust, but that one's our like mobile setup. Here's some other fun photographs from the event. If you know Python Space, if you've ever heard of them, well, they're in Bishop on the way, so we got a cheeky little picture with them. This is us with like all the members of the rocketry Discord group that were out there. Quite a number of people included this because when everyone's camping out there, we could go back to Fernley and eat a real dinner at night. That was great. We also met on the way back. I was contacted by somebody from a community college in Reno who was building Mojave Sphinx. And like, hey, you want to come see some jet engines or like jets flying around? We're like, yeah. So we came, saw what they were doing, and we got a little picture with them and their, I think, F5s.
Yeah. Yeah, great experience all around. We're planning on going back to Balls this year, so we're getting close to submitting our proposal to Tripoli, and we'll be doing a similar demonstration again, hopefully. Some upcoming projects, like covered Mojave Sphinx, just kind of looking forward into things that we're going to be doing over the next year or so.
So more funny fuel stuff. I think everybody at this point knows about the WD-40 that's been very popular. We will be doing more weird and wacky things just to prove that you can. More colors. We've
often said that this rocket will burn any liquid that is flammable and low enough viscosity to be injected. We've, I think, tested that pretty thoroughly, but there's still a few like really out there things that we haven't tried. We've got some used cooking oil that we're going to thin down a little bit. There's a couple other exotic flammable liquids. We've got like some citrus peel extract. Smells like oranges.
I've put bees in our tank. I have this bottle that everyone seems to be rather disturbed by. That's honeybees dissolved in ethyl alcohol. I don't know how it's made. It's really weird. But it does burn. I've put it in our fuel tank before. Yeah, it's some like Eastern European traditional medicine. Think vanilla extract, but with bees, same exact concept. It's ethanol. MSCX. This is one of our more interesting projects. So this was our original attempt at a pencil, but we've actually got a newer one over at our stand there. MSCX doesn't really stand for anything anymore, but it's our experimental chamber. We're trying to go get higher performance out of our motors, which have historically been like very okay-ish on a specific impulse. As of our most recent static test, our newer pencil injector got about, we think, 87% ANC star, which is like far better than we've got before. So we're pushing the bounds of our performance, and we've also been using some ablative, like McMaster phenolic for our chambers.
And the side benefit of doing this testing is that it's a very good demonstration of saying once you have this Mojave Sphinx platform that is very easy to use, it's reliable, it's works well, like we're then taking that and using it as a test bed for all of these other things that we want to try, and we want people to look at this and say, hey, I want to do my own injector development research campaign. You can use the same system as a test bed platform.
Also, Full Cat 2. We had an original Full Cat. It had some mediocre tests and one very spectacular fireball, which there were some great photos of. But we're building a new one that's going to look a lot more like Mojave Sphinx.
Yep, so this will be a 6-inch diameter rocket with a much longer tank, so we'll be kind of pushing up into the upper end of like the O-class total impulse range with this.
And this you may have heard of by now is one of our wilder, wackier,
awesome.
more WTF projects.
Nice.
Yes, we are making Mojave Sphinx heavy. It is not a joke, as some people seem to think it is. This is in fact something we are actively working on and will hopefully be launching in the next couple months out of FAR.
And one thing to note here is that all 3 of the rockets required to do this are already built. So the center core will be Mojave Sphinx serial number 4. We've got that over in the exhibition hall. And then we've got these 2 3-inch side boosters. Both of those have been built. Both have been test fired. One of them has flown standalone. So the vast majority of the hardware for this project is already existing. It's just the remaining integration work to put together.
So, we still have a few minutes of time. Questions?
So in your Sphinx Heavy, how do you go to coordinate the ignition on all 3 of them?
That is a great question.
Yeah, so that was part of what we did the drag race for, was to test and demonstrate simultaneity of multiple ignitions. So we saw about 40 milliseconds of delay, and we're confident that we can keep it at or below that for lighting 3 at a time. So that's like really the goal of that flight, was showing we can do multiple ignitions close enough in time to each other that we can do all 3 cores successfully.
Remember how those rockets were about 3 feet apart? Even, in reality, they both lit before one even like actually starts moving.
Mm-hmm.
But even the scenario where it's like, one is 3 feet up while the other one that's when it ignites. 3 feet's not a very far distance to string a 3-pin cable.
Yeah.
So we'll have essentially extra slack in the cables, so we'll account for some amount of initial motion, where we'll have a little bit of a window for it to ignite even after first motion if we don't get them perfectly simultaneous, but we're confident enough. And then we'll also have redundant pyrotechnic igniters as well, so we'll have 2 pyrotechnic charges per chamber.
Yeah, that was it.
And then is it going to separate?
Yes.
Yes. So if we go back to that,
And land. No.
that's
Not yet, not
No.
not yet. We'll picture it here because this is just a pretend SolidWorks CAD, but there will be attachments. There'll be an attachment up here and a hook down here, so the boosters will shut down. There'll be a pyrotechnic device we already have that will separate the boosters, and the center core will continue thrusting forward.
Yeah, we've done component level testing on the separation mechanism. It's basically a little pyrotechnic pin puller, so it's got like a little piston with an O-ring and a match and a small powder charge, and it retracts a pin that goes through the clevis and holds them together.
So when are you expecting to have that ready to go?
It's not really that far away from launching, but because of our site availability as well as some other projects we've got on our plate, we're kind of tentatively targeting June 21st, which is the third Saturday of June at FAR.
A little bit TBD. We're planning on doing a standalone flight of one of the side boosters to test the electronics and the staging logic and everything, make sure that it fires the separation mechanism when it's supposed to. We've had some electronics issues with that have delayed us a little bit, but we're planning on doing that fairly soon, and then that's really the last major step, the last thing that we need to test before we hook all of them up together. Okay. Now, as for performance, is it really going to go that much higher? Probably not. The burn time on the boosters is fairly short, but there's still like a short enough period of the center core after separation that it's not as much of a performance benefit as it would be on a larger, longer burning system. But it's mainly a demonstration that you can do something that is cool and complex using this type of system as a baseline.
Very cool.
If anyone has any further questions, we will be at our table in the hall for the rest of the day, so find us there as well as our hardware.
And I assume as soon as this is launched, you guys are gonna publish a video, I hope.
Oh, yeah. We're
Yeah,
gonna make sure I have lots of cameras.
Yeah, I think we're baselining 6 onboard cameras, so like one up and one down view on each core.
yeah. And hopefully stationary ground cameras looking up at it.
Yeah, yeah, we've got some plans in the works. Some people who might be able to help us out with that. All right,
Thank you.
thanks.
All right.